Hey there folks, Rel here. Today we'll be taking a look at the T7 Mini-Chaingun for the heavy assault. That's the TR's Empire-specific heavy weapon. Most players will either love it or they hate it, but I'll let you know that I'm having a lot of fun with this weapon, so hopefully this review will help you get a better understanding of the weapon and show you how to use it effectively. The T7 Mini-Chaingun is going to cost you 700 station cash or 1000 certs to unlock. It has a starting ammo capacity of 100 rounds with 500 in reserve, but extended magazines will bump you up to 200 rounds per magazine. It fires at 800 rounds per minute, which is amazingly fast for most weapons, and the only other weapons that operate on this level are all close quarters based. So you're looking at the SMGs, the close quarters carbines, and some of the assault rifles. But from a heavy assault standpoint, this thing is an absolute bullet hose. Each shot deals 143 damage up to 10 meters, that's the minimum range, and tapers off to 125 damage at the 65 meter maximum. And this means that it deals standard carbine damage up close and more damage at maximum range than other weapons in its damage category. So to take someone down purely with body shots, you're looking at a 7-shot kill range at the minimum distance and an 8-shot kill range at the maximum distance. Given the weapon's rate of fire and the damage, it's statistically a death machine both close and at distant ranges, but the deciding factor, of course, is going to depend on how accurately you can land those shots. Accuracy is a pretty tricky topic with this weapon, so we'll be discussing it in some depth later. It has a decent reload speed at 3.4 seconds for a short reload and 4 seconds flat for a long reload. Short reload refers to when you still have a round left in the chamber, while the long reload is referring to an empty weapon. The recoil is negligible for the most part, and at long ranges it's very easy to control while stationary and aiming down sights. So just like the lasher, the cone of fire is actually what you need to focus on managing, and not so much the recoil itself. You can equip either extended magazines or a laser sight or a flashlight on the chaingun. While the laser sight actually offers some pretty legitimate benefits, I don't quite see it trumping the extended magazines as an option unless you're really good about your reloads. Everyone's least favorite part of the T7 Mini-Chaingun is of course that it has a spin-up time, which I believe is half a second. Spin-up time is referring to the delay before bullets actually begin to flow from the weapon after you press the button. The devs have mentioned that they would like to make the chaingun fire as soon as the button is pressed and then slowly speed up to its maximum rate of fire over that 0.5 second spin up, but that change has not made it into the game just yet. However, you can actually completely ignore the spin up delay by using what I guess is a bug, or maybe it's intended, I don't know, but I doubt it. And the way that you do this is by aiming down sights as soon as you start firing the weapon from the hip. So you just left click and then you right click. You do not need to continue aiming down the sights in order for this to work, you just need to tap it. You'll see me do it a lot in this gameplay. I'll turn a corner and then I'll instantly start firing instead of waiting for that 0.5 second spin up. And there are some drawbacks to it, namely your accuracy. Because remember that you're going to be starting with the hip fire cone of fire instead of the aim down sights cone of fire. But this is an extremely effective strategy for dealing with those close quarters encounters. And I guess that kind of brings us into the accuracy part of things. The chaingun deals with its cone of fire a lot differently than other weapons, but we'll go over the basics first. If you're crouched and aiming down sights or standing and aiming down sights, you're going to have amazing accuracy, at least until you fired off maybe 10 or 20 shots. But that's alright because you can easily burst fire this weapon. There is of course that spin up delay when you're aiming down sights, but it's pretty easy to cope with at range. You can't use that instant firing trick I mentioned earlier for dealing with those long range encounters because you will be starting with that hip fire cone of fire and it creates way too much bullet spread for medium to long range engagements. So in this respect, a weapon with more accuracy over range is going to trump your chaingun because you are required to burst, and you will be dealing with that 0.5 second spin-up time every time you do. This makes sense of course because the Mini-Chaingun was not meant to be a long-range powerhouse, at least I don't think it was, but it does definitely work for those long-range situations. Hip firing the weapon is a little bit different. As you hip fire, the cone of fire will quickly increase to its maximum size, and at which point you won't really be able to hit much of anything unless it's closer than about 15 meters. However, here's where things start getting interesting. If you aim down sights, even for a second, that cone of fire gets shrunk down a great deal and will then start to expand again until it hits maximum. So you can essentially keep resetting your cone of fire just by aiming down sights for a moment. And it's the same thing with jumping too. Normally if you jump, your cone of fire will permanently stay at the expanded maximum, but with the chain gun, if you just ADS for a moment, it'll calm back down. It does not decrease entirely, or even to its starting hip fire range, but it does cut down on the cone of fire considerably. So what this translates to is instant accuracy, at least to a certain degree. And this is going to roll us into the next topic, which is how we can be effective with this weapon. Since the T7 gives us different stages of accuracy to work with, it allows us to pretty easily determine what kind of behaviors we need to use to engage enemies over different ranges. So to start out, we can say with some confidence that the standing hip fire will work for enemies up to almost 30 yards away, but anything further out and you may want to aim down sights. If we jump and cap the cone of fire out, it won't be entirely reliable, but it's still pretty workable up to about the 15-meter range. If you are aiming down sights though while standing, you can dump on people pretty easily, even up to 50 meters, though it may require just a bit of bursting. Anything beyond that though will definitely require bursting to be effective. And if we are shooting at something that is far off, aim for the head and compensate for the recoil downwards. There is no first recoil multiplier, so you're just compensating for the standard recoil of this weapon, which is very, very low to begin with. So what you should take from this is that the T7 Mini-Chaingun can work very well over many ranges, but landing shots on target does require a good feel for how the gun operates. And now let's get into some general strategy. First off, work your cover. This was kind of the first thing that I mentioned for the lasher as well, but it works with the chain gun too, but for different reasons. You can literally hold down the trigger and just mow down groups of enemies as long as you're smart about it, because you have so much ammo and you have a killer rate of fire. If you're constantly laying on the trigger, enemies are not going to want to peek their head out to face you, and they definitely do not want you to round the corner to face them, but that's what should happen. If you need to advance on a location, or if you're trying to avoid enemy fire, just work your cover. And this is especially useful if you're playing offensively, because PlanetSide 2 uses client-side hit detection, meaning that what happens on your screen is then sent to the enemy's client, but there is always some amount of delay, because the internet will never be instant, even the speed of light isn't instant. So if an enemy is sitting there thinking to themselves, what am I going to do? On your screen, you're going to be rounding that corner and then filling them with lead. This is even before they see you on their screen. It's not a huge gap in time, depending on the enemy's internet connection, but it can end up being a free bullet or two before the enemy starts to react. Secondly, and probably what I should have mentioned first, is that you should always try to use that instant fire trick in close quarters. So as soon as an enemy appears on your screen, just left click to hip fire and right click to aim down sights. And remember that you do not need to sit in aim down sights mode, but you do want to get those bullets flying as soon as possible. And if you're not in close quarters and you think enemies are nearby, still try to activate the spin up. Especially if you're not moving and you're just kind of hanging out in an area, keep tapping the left mouse button, and it'll end up shaving off some reaction time for both you and your weapon. Also, remember that aim down sights is going to trim up your cone of fire a considerable amount. And what I tend to do is just hold down the trigger when fighting multiple opponents at closer distances, and when I finish one off, I turn to the other and I aim down sights, always holding down the trigger so that when my spray gets big, some stray bullets might hit them before I hone in on their head. And that's probably the next thing. This weapon works very well for headshots, so do not be afraid to aim for the head.
Could use some ammunition.
This is just general strategy for any shooter, but if you're in many versus one situations, eliminate your biggest threat first. And this is usually just the guy who's actually paying attention to you. This weapon will not make you an unstoppable war machine, but it will definitely make you feel like you are. Don't bother letting off the trigger unless you know that you can afford the spin-up time. Just remember to aim down sights and move from target to target.
Eyes on an enemy.
Reload when you can. Now 200 rounds is a lot, it really is, but if you can afford to top yourself off, it is always a smart idea. And this goes double for anyone not running extended magazines, which in my opinion you should be doing just to get the most out of this weapon. And if you do have all of that ammo, it is not a bad idea to set up a firing lane to support your allies by softening your enemies up. Now that's the same way you kind of do with the lasher. It may not kill enemies, but if they get winged by a bullet or two on their way to their destination, it's going to help your teammates out and maybe give you an assist. The chain gun is also a great supplement to anti-air measures, as it seems to deal really decent damage to ESFs. The quick bullet velocity and low recoil makes it pretty easy to land those shots even on moving targets at some distance. It does not, however, do a whole lot to harassers, and I'm not really sure why. And for anyone who is playing TR and is not using a chain gun, do not walk in front of the guy with the chain gun. He doesn't want to let off the trigger for you and will likely mow you down just to punish you for your mistake. Overall, the T7 Mini-Chaingun is a powerhouse that is at the very least on par with other weapons in the Terran Republic's arsenal. This is quite honestly the first weapon that I'll probably get an Araxian medal with because it is just that much fun. Especially if you understand the ranges at which you can dish out the hurt. The weapon is far, far from underpowered and performs very well in many situations. Situations that I really don't think it should perform well in, such as when you're sitting on top of a tower and just sniping people. It will of course get trumped by more accurate weapons at longer ranges if you stay out in the open too long, and it will also get trumped by shotguns in extremely close quarters situations. And this is the way that it should be. The chain gun is more of a jack of all trades, and I highly recommend it to players who are adept at dealing with many versus one situations, or players who just like feeling cool. If this video has been interesting or helpful, please feel free to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about the channel. And if there's anything I left out, or if you have a really awesome streak or story you'd like to share, just leave a comment or a video response below. Thanks very much, folks. Rel signing off.